to another fun-filled, action-packed episode of 1HMPS Retro. This is episode 12. I'm your host with the most, Andy, aka the Real Locomaniac, and today we're lucky enough to be joined by one of the greatest names in the gaming industry. He is one half of the legendary Oliver twins, Philip Oliver.
Thank you very much, Andy.
No, thank you very much, Philip. I'm so happy that you've actually taken time out to actually appear on this podcast. It's a real big deal for me because I'm a huge fan of your work.
Well, that's very kind. I have to say, I kind of love talking about games and to journalists about the games. I'm very, very proud of all the games we've made over the years. It's the best part of my job.
Okay, one of the first things I want to ask you then, Philip, is how did you get into gaming then? What was one of the first things? How did you sort of like arcades or home computers?
Well, Andrew and I grew up in the early 80s, and we were your kind of sci-fi geeks, basically, sort of weaned on your Star Trek and kind of when Star Wars came out, so the biggest fans and everything. Although, actually, we've got some competition there, actually, on that. So, of course, when we saw things like Space Invaders in the arcades, which must have been about 79, 80, it was, whoa, there's real sci-fi there. It's like right there. And so we were kind of really amazed by that. Begged our parents to sort of get us originally like a Pong machine, just one of these, I think it was a Binatone Pong ripoff. That you plug in under the sort of living room TV, two paddles on nice little telephone cords, where you can basically play Pong. So I think we got that at Christmas 1980. And that was fairly enjoyable. It was like, hey, cool, we're actually kind of controlling pictures on the TV and actually having good fun and stuff. But you realise kind of how limited it is. I guess the next step after that was that our older brother Martin decided to go and buy a ZX81.
I remember that.
And put that under the TV. As I often tell many people, he then promptly discovered girls and it got left on the TV. And geeky me and Andrew decided to start playing with it and actually seeing what we could do. And obviously the first thing we wanted to do is see if we could recreate Pong, which by kind of using the old type-in listings that you found in the manual and in kind of the Computer Weekly magazines that used to be sort of in the magazine shops, we managed to pretty quickly sort of do little games like Pong.
Well, I mean, at which point did you realise that you could actually do this and take it a little bit further? Because I always tried to do sort of like games in BASIC myself from like magazines, and I could never do them. I always struggled with them. There was always one little thing that read wrong, so they never worked for me. But at which point did you realise, like, wow, we can do something?
Yeah, this is very true. Typing in those listings was not pleasant, and you're absolutely right that there's always one little bit that doesn't work. We had those experiences, and it was very, very frustrating. You're probably aware that most of the games industry is kind of, especially in the UK, is set up by two brothers. I think. Oh, hello. Talking of two brothers, Andrew's just walked in.
Hi.
Hello there, Andrew. Wow. If I wasn't intimidated enough before, I'm like, well, I've got both of you now. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Andrew.
Oh, hi. Are we on Skype or not Skype? No, we're not Skyping. Well, we are Skype, but we're not video.
You are Skyping, yeah. So I'm recording at the moment. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
So be careful what you say. So we're just talking about sort of how did we get into it. So the type-in listings, the two brothers, kind of one of the things that the games industry in the UK that's kind of grown up on is the kind of two brothers. And I think the reason that this has happened is because they like two brothers will quite often challenge each other, spur each other on, but also get through things twice as quickly. So when you're just kind of there on your own and things aren't going well, it's very easy just to walk away at that point. Whereas when your brother's nagging you and saying, oi, come on, it's like I typed my 20 lines in, you get your 20 lines in and working.
So you
kind of kept nagging each other sort of, and spurring each other on.
There's also something that there is that whole thing about, like, if you show your mum and dad, they'll go, oh, that's nice. I wonder what you did in your bedroom for so long. But they don't get what the challenge is, and they don't see the point of it. And there's not really, in those days, certainly, there wasn't really anything to see. But we just get the greatest pleasure out of, say, making a simple bat and ball and making it two-player. Because you couldn't program AI, but you had AI because you had your brother to play against. So you could make little tiny simplest of games,
and somebody else would appreciate it,
and somebody would appreciate it and play it with you, and then go, oh, hang on, I can make it better, and you can sort of sit back and let them make it better, and then you say, okay, I'll make it better again.
Did you end up showing some of your friends some of these early games that you programmed for the magazines?
Well, we sort of did, but even then there wasn't a real appreciation for sort of what we were doing. We're just...
You're exactly at the same level. So even some of our friends who liked computer games, or even called themselves were programmers, they were either, oh, that's nowhere near the games I play, or, oh, well, I'm a really good programmer, and they almost discount it, and you think, well, I know I'm not quite your level. Yeah. But when you're brothers and you got the computer together, you're pretty much exactly at the same level.
So what was the first game that you guys actually made yourselves then?
Well, the first one that we sold was, it was a type-in listing in 1983 for the BBC called, oh dear me, it was 1983. Roadrunner. Well done.
Right, yeah.
So it was type-in listing, computer and video games, really early edition.
Had nothing to do with the little Wile E. Coyote and...
Which is a great character, but nothing to do with that. No, this was basically just a top-down racer written in BASIC. Sort of the road is scrolling and you've got to keep your car on the road.
So how was that game received then by the public then?
We never ever really received feedback. You basically just put it out there, and I'm sure people typed it. I'm sure a lot of people typed it in, played it, and everything. We tried to make sure that it was actually quite a short listing and quite a clever listing. For the number of characters you typed, you actually got quite a lot of gameplay per character.
Right.
So we published. We were like 13 at school, and our names were in print.
Yeah, which was cool.
That's amazing. Well, how did you guys feel when that actually happened? You know, you must have were you showing off to your friends?
But it doesn't win much favour at school when you kind of you show people, because they go, oh yeah, whatever. Because to be honest, they didn't kind of appreciate it really.
Yeah.
We did. We thought it was cool. I mean, the next big thing that happened after that is about 6 months later, I guess.
Our computer competition winners, Philip and Andrew Oliver from Trowbridge in Wiltshire. Where are they? Let's have a look. Why don't you go? Why not go either side? One either side. That's it. Somebody over with Chris. You come over here with me. That's it. That's splendid. Which is which?
I'm Andrew. I'm Philip.
Andrew and Philip. All right.
Why did you actually write it, and what was the basis for it?
Well, a lot of people have been trying to write arcade games in BASIC, which are far too slow, and we really thought we couldn't get one sort of a high enough quality, so we had to turn to a slow game, sort of more family game, and we came up with this idea after playing some board games.
Okay, I mean, how did you actually go about designing the game and actually putting it into the computer? Do you have any problems as you put it together?
Well, I wrote it on paper and my brother typed it in. We tested it, found hundreds of mistakes, and after sort of a week of work, we managed to iron most of them out.
Great.
You've got to try and get each player into the middle, and you're only allowed to turn a corner at the end of a dice shake or when you hit a wall.
Onto these guys' prizes anyway, and I know that everybody will be green with envy. They got a nice computer of their own at home, so we said, why don't you choose another prize? And you've decided to go for what's called a high-resolution monitor, whatever that is, for goodness sake. I suppose you lot know. Sounds like something who collects the rubbers at the end of class. But anyway, high-resolution monitor, and also the possibility that top manufacturers, Commodore, are going to market your game and it'll actually appear on the high street. So once again, congratulations to the winners of our computer competition, the Olivers!
Was when we won a TV competition. Now that got a completely different reaction from the school.
Because we were on TV, and it was actually the special guest that week was Gary Newman. So Gary Newman was kind of there with us, and people were bloody hell. And it's national TV when you only had BBC and ITV.
And it was a Saturday morning kind of
kids show. So everyone in school saw it and goes, "Christ, you're on TV at the weekend."
Why don't you tell our listeners what actually the competition was on the actual TV show, the Saturday show?
Okay, so what it was design a game competition But we kind of went one better, and I guess the reason we won is because we didn't just design one, we programmed it and kind of delivered it on a tape so they could play it. Looking back on it, the game was pretty basic, but also looking back on technology, that was pretty basic too.
Yeah, I mean, when we turned up, I mean, they said, like, we sort of blew the competition out the water because ours was actually a runnable working game. Everybody else was a drawing with a description. And they said, which is what they actually expected. But they said they had to give us something because the amount of effort that we must have put in compared to anyone else. Most other people, you could tell, had done it in one evening, at the best a few evenings. Whereas we had clearly spent a number of weeks. So they said, you kind of won it on perseverance, but it was clever because it worked.
So what was the prize that you guys ended up winning then for this competition?
A Commodore monitor, which to this day I have.
Oh, you still have it? Wow.
It was it used to be used in the office all the way up until flat screens came in. There was always kicking around the office somewhere being used by somebody because it was a composite input monitor.
And it's still in working order, is it?
Yeah, still in working order. And, the only got replaced because flat screens came in, and nobody wants a CRT. So,
all right. So after that competition, then where did you take your gaming? Then where did you think I can do another game, but make it a little bit better? What was the next game that you made?
So that game itself was actually very slow because it was written in BASIC, but it was written on BBC. Now the great thing about the BBC was you could actually type in assembler, which compiles down to machine code, which is exceptionally fast. Assembler is very, very difficult to write.
But that's what the arcade games were written in. So we had this aspiration, if we want to write Pac-Man, Space Invaders, whatever, we've got to learn this stuff. So we started to learn it. And also, we kind of became little heroes around the school because of the Saturday show. But we were really embarrassed by the quality of the game. But we could do so much better than that. I mean, the game that we write now, as we finish it, we're very proud of it. Yeah. But we always go, well, we could write better. It's like the lessons you learn from every time. So every time you go, well, we could do better.
That's right, yeah.
So what happened was we decided to try and learn assembler. BBC was perfect for this. We had a very good teacher, Mr. McCann, who just started teaching us computer studies, who was very, very kind and actually went through assembler with us and just taken us through a big listing. It was actually only a couple of hours, but it's like it was one step which we couldn't kind of do on our own. And this teacher basically gave us an evening of his time, just taking us through converting. It was a paint routine within one of our programs. We'd done like a little filling in pixels sort of in a paint package, and of course filling the pixels was so slow, so we like, see this little routine here,
how would you convert
how would you change that into sort of assembler and into machine code? And he spent a few hours going through it with us, and after that we were away because it's like, right, we now know how assembler works. We've got past that hurdle. And then we were away and we just started writing all sorts of games kind of in assembler and then taking those out to publishers.
Actually, I mean, the BBC, it was a brilliant, brilliant machine, and it's just a shame that you haven't got that access anymore. Although people kind of have, but they haven't got the patience for it.
Well, the BBC was one of those computers that all the schools used to have back in those days, if I remember right. My school had one as well.
Everybody had one. It was a perfect machine for learning.
It was absolutely perfect in every way. But one of the things was, it was this thing where we had a whole game running and you could just pick up a routine, like it could be a spike routine or something, and you could just convert a bit into assembly and then run it, and it would just run faster now. And so bit by bit, you could just convert it from basic into assembler, which went into machine code, which was just a perfect way of learning. And the other thing is, we only spent an evening with this teacher, but there's only like 30 instructions. So it's like, once you know those instructions, you find them very limited. I mean, it was proper risk. I mean, load and store and add. But there were only so many instructions there. There weren't that many. So once you knew those instructions, it's like, right. So theoretically, everything can be done with this very small section of thing. And it was just like, well, just hard work then to learn it. Whereas nowadays, there's so many complicated things. I mean, if you were to write an application in Windows, you have to link masses of libraries. Well, what are those libraries? It's like there's just masses of functionality and rules and all sorts you have to know. And it's just like, blimey, it's like, it's just hardcore. Well, you don't know where to start. And the other thing is the perceived goal is way too high. Whereas when we started doing this, our perceived goal was, could we make a bat and a ball? Because that'd be quite impressive. And then could we make a Space Invader? And that's almost what people pay for in the arcades. You could, whereas now you look at Call of Duty and you go, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. I bet you though your teacher was very impressed and very proud of both of you though.
Oh, yeah. We've been back and visited him a few times at the school.
Really? So what's he said to you guys then?
No, generally he's very, very proud of what we did, and I think he described us as the Sparky kids, and then he often references us to his students, kind of you can make something of yourself if you actually put the effort in. But again,
they named a building after us in the school.
Yeah, they did.
Really? So, seriously? Wow.
It is quite funny.
There is the Oliver Building, which we went down and opened back a few years ago at Clarendon School in Trowbridge.
But I'm just wondering, are the kids aware of the history behind the name of the building?
What does the plaque say?
There is a plaque.
I think the plaque says computer software creators, and I guess
it says Blitz Games.
It might say Blitz.
Yeah.
So I imagine most people have probably got their flipping smartphones in their pockets while they're going out to school. Yeah. And, I mean, I don't think they quite put a QR code on it so they could scan it, but it doesn't take much to type in Blitz Games into your smartphone. So yeah, I'm sure they are very aware.
Slightly off topic though. I mean, I was gonna. I told my wife a few days ago that I was going to conduct the interview with Philip, and she was like, "Who's Philip Oliver?" And it's like, out of the Oliver twins.
No, you're geeky, mate. You're geeky. You see, this is the problem. It's lost on people who aren't geeky.
Well, I mean, her answer was so. How come you've got the guys from The Matrix doing a podcast with you if your podcast is about gaming? And it's like, no, that's the Wachowski brothers. The Oliver twins are the creators of Dizzy. And she's like, no, don't know him.
No, we're not the Thompson twins either.
All right, so what was the first game then that you guys really published then and sort of done really well with?
Well, I was going to say that when learning assembler, we then started sort of doing a few games, none of which went particularly big. There was Easy Art, Panda Sprites, KV, Killer P, Telscope.
Yeah,
we sort of like
a whole load of games which we were getting paid
a few weeks,
£100 per game, which you could occasionally find in Smith's if you kind of hunted really hard.
Or Woolworths, if you still remember it.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's very impressive, though, for kids your age at the time sort of doing that. Very impressive.
We were at school, so
it was pocket money, so it's fine. But what actually happened was that carried on for a couple of years, I guess. But then we went along to ECTS in 1985.
Well, we finished school,
and we just finished sixth form. Yeah, we were just finishing sixth form, and we basically convinced our parents that we'll just take a year out. Yes, we've got universities lined up and everything, but we'll just take a year out and we'll see if we can make a go of this.
Yeah.
And so in the September, there was an ECTS show in London, and we went along and we met the Darlings, who were just then setting up Codemasters.
Right.
They had a little booth. It was so tiny. It was like 3 meters by 3 meters or something, with Richard, David, and Jim just kind of all standing there, basically saying, "We're a new software company. Come talk to us." So we walked over and kind of had these cassettes, which have obviously already been published. So we had 6 or 7 kind of published games, and we walked up to them and sort of said, "We're already doing these published games, and we're just working on another one." Showed them some kind of sketches and talked about it. And this was Robin Hood. And we said, "How much would you pay if we developed this game and you published it?" And David came back with the answer, about £10,000. And I'm like, whoa!
That is impressive.
Speechless. It's like, oh my God. And so we said, right, okay, deal. Okay, fine.
We'll come back to you.
We'll come back to you when it's finished, which won't be very long at all. And I don't know, about 2 weeks later, because quite frankly, we didn't sleep after that.
We just couldn't believe our luck. And it's like, look, while they're hot and they're saying that.
While they're hot to trot. Yeah.
We don't want to muck about. And this was September, and we were thinking, we've got to get this out for Christmas, although the turnaround times were pretty quick. But we were like, look, they said it, they need it, like, let's just do it.
Yeah. So we turned up at their offices a couple of weeks later with the kind of finished game. That was Super Robin Hood on the Amstrad CPC. And yeah, they loved it. And they said, yep, we'll publish this. This is perfect. This is exactly what we're looking for. Then the small print came out, which was actually the £10,000 is an estimate of royalties and there's nothing up front.
Right.
P per cassette.
But you know what? We were like, well, hang on a minute. It's like, it doesn't take many units at all to get past what we've been offered from previous publishers.
Yeah.
But so how many are you going to duplicate in your first run? And the first run was huge. It was like 100,000 copies or something. Wow. It's like, okay, it's like, I think we can do that. So we agreed that they could publish it. They had it out in something like October of that year. And the thing went straight to number 1 on the Amstrad.
Absolutely fantastic. It's a great game, because I've been playing it recently. I do a video series on YouTube where I compare the games on the Amstrad and the Spectrum, but the Amstrad version of Super Robin Hood is unbelievably fantastic. It's really well done.
Very kind, thank you very much. That was done in about 3 weeks.
Wow.
With no sleep. So anyway, when that...
And no graphic artist, you'll probably notice that.
Yeah.
We did have to try and draw it ourselves, and we're not really artists.
Yeah, I was going to say...
the animation is pretty good, actually, on Robin Hood himself, actually. It's really well done.
That's very kind, thank you. So, of course, after doing that and getting the publishing deal and that going straight to number 1, we really didn't have much of a social life for the next few years. We basically spent every waking hour just writing games, because when you're a student that's... Well, most of our friends had gone to university and were incredibly poor, and we could turn around £10,000 in a few weeks.
So we were,
so you don't knock it, you just do it again and
Definitely.
then again.
All of our friends had sort of gone off to different universities, and we were kind of working as hard as they were, but we were making loads of money, whereas they were just ending up in more debt.
I mean, what were your parents thinking at this point, though? Because, I mean, you'd done Super Robin Hood, had done very well. What were your parents thinking? Should you carry on?
Oh, no. I mean,
the moment that first one went to number 1 in the charts, we had a few press stories about whiz kids. They're on the road to being millionaires and all this really zany stories, which was kind of like really over the top. But it was like, blimey, you've only just started this. And you kind of, we got in the Telegraph and the Guardian and the Sun, and it was like, bloody hell. And it's like, so I think they were quite impressed. It's like, right, we said turn your mind to it. Within a few months, you're in the national papers. And it's like whiz kids.
So after that, we did the Ghost Hunters. The next one we did was Dizzy, obviously, which was kind of... I mean, obviously, that's the one that really went very big and is remembered so fondly.
That's the one that you guys will always be remembered for. Dizzy is such a classic. But yeah, if you tell us how that went about.
How that came about was that we did the Super Robin Hood, which is kind of a sideways platformer character game. Then moved on to Ghost Hunters. This was the era of Ghostbusters, you'll remember, by the way.
Classic movie.
And then we actually got to fight Ghostbusters a few years later.
Yeah, we did actually do the Ghostbusters 2
Ghostbusters 2, yeah. What was that released by Activision, I think?
That's correct. So when we were writing Ghost Hunters, one thing that kind of quite annoyed us was the fact that the face of the character was 3 pixels by 3 pixels with 3 colours. And it's like, it's not really much of a face. You can't really add much of a personality. Yeah. And so I was just messing around, going, how big can we draw a face which would still physically move around the screen? Now, back in those days, the computing power was so tiny that actually what you could move physically around the screen was actually pretty small.
It was all down to a few sprites.
It was something like 32 pixels by 32 pixels or something. So it's like, basically, I ended up drawing a face which was the majority of the space that we could move around.
Right.
And that's kind of just on its own didn't look particularly good. And I just drew a face and then kind of, stick the edge round and it's kind of roughly egg shape. Leave a little bit of space on the edge for sort of some hands and some feet and stuff, because we haven't got room for a body and limbs and who needs them anyway? And so it had this cute little kind of character, just a single frame, and it's like, right, okay, let's kind of see if we can put some expressions on him and kind of make him a little wrinkly mouth, which is scared, and a smiley face and a sad face and an angry face. And then let's make him move a little bit. Just kind of, what else can you move? But basically, the egg moves up and down a little bit. The arms move a little bit and stuff. It's like, okay, that looks quite interesting on screen. Now we've got to kind of create a world that this character can live in, and for things that he can do.
How did you go about deciding what sort of game this character you'd created would end up being like?
To be honest, it was done in a couple of hours. Pretty much. Most of the work was done in a couple of hours, and there was no way would we have ever conceived it possible that 20 years we'd still be talking to people about this character that we created.
When we were kids, we were really big fans of Disney. And it was always this thing about, well, that's a cartoon, and it's really cool, and like they've built theme parks and everything on these kind of cartoons that people have drawn. And that you can get really empathy with these handmade characters.
Yeah.
So when computers and computer games started, when we saw Pac-Man, we really loved Pac-Man. It was like, well, they're little characters, and you kind of wanted them to be real, live characters. In fact, they did get made into a cartoon. And with the iteration of computer graphics happening so fast, we were just going to go, oh, there'll be proper little characters in there. Because we saw Inky, Blinky and Clyde and stuff as little personalities.
Yeah.
And then one of the things about Disney is they say that you find things cute or more endearing if they've got big head and big eyes, because babies, and so it's a natural human trait. So this idea of the big head, like, you don't really think about the arms and the legs. So we were sort of like, well, let's just make the big head thing, and it kind of worked
because he looks like such a happy little character, you know, just standing there wiggling his arms, his little somersaulting. It was just fantastically done.
There was a brilliant reason why he's happy and bouncy, and that was what we like to call as Tyrannosaurus Rex vision. It's like when you watch Jurassic Park, it says stay still and they won't notice you. Now on a spectrum, there was a really horrible attribute clash problem whereby you'd lose all the colours if you walked in front of something of a different colour. So we were saying, God, like, you walk Dizzy along, and if he goes in front of a tree, he's sort of like a chameleon because he changes the colour of the tree, and you can't see him. But so long as he moves, you see movement. So we said, look, all the time you're walking in front of stuff, you can see him. The moment you stop, he disappears. He kind of like, he melds into the background. So we said, let's just never make him stop. And so we just had this idea that he would always bounce. It's like just so that there was movement and you could always key in where it was. So it was very much just a problem to get over attribute clash.
That's fantastic, because I never knew that. I always wondered why he wiggled his arms, and it's fantastic to hear that.
Yeah,
that's why.
But he did look kind of really energetic and bouncy because we did that. But it wasn't kind of...
It was to avoid that technical issue.
It was to avoid a technical constraint.
Yeah.
But who came up with the name, the character Dizzy? Who came up with the name Dizzy, and why was he called Dizzy?
Heavens. I don't know. I mean...
Who did?
It was because he was rolling around, and we joked that because we did have the rolling and the somersaulting. And we were trying to. I remember trying to think of the name, and we had a rolling somersaulting character.
I do remember my dad came up with, or our dad came up with Yolk Folk, because he saw it as an egg, obviously. I mean, he drew it as a head, but then kind of crafted it into an egg, because it's
and we said, we'll make them a family of eggs.
Yeah, we'll make them a family.
And he just joked, you could call them the Yolk Folk. So we were going, that's actually really good.
Yeah, so that kind of stuck. That was our daddy kind of checked that.
Yeah.
But where Dizzy came from, the name?
I think we're just rolling around. I mean, we are fans of Disney, so it was kind of, we wanted 2 syllables. Philip's got this whole thing about putting Zs in makes things trendy. That's why I've got Philip's games. There are lots of things.
Come on, Z's cool.
You see it all the time. You see it in Bratz and stuff. It's like people see Z on the end because it's like makes it a bit unique because there's so few words with Z. And so I think it's a little bit of a sort of, we wanted something which was 2 or 3 syllables. You can't have a single syllable name. You wanted 2 or 3 syllables. If you can stick some Zs in it. We were fans of Disney, so that probably had a little bit of thing. He somersaulted. You would be dizzy if you somersaulted as much as he did. That's really, I think, where it came from.
Because I always thought where the name came from, Dizzy, was because the fact that you could only collect one item and you had to go all the way to the left, collect something, then go all the way to the right, drop something.
Frustration.
Yeah, we're calling Mr. Frustration, shall we?
Yeah. I mean, obviously that was in the first one, and we knew that was overly frustrating, so we then changed it and we gave him a little inventory bag of 3 items. But then you had a sort of difficult switching thing, although that actually became part of the gameplay, was juggling your inventory.
That's right. Because I remember progressing from Treasure Island Dizzy, where it just kept on changing to where it became the standard, which was Fantasy World Dizzy. But going back to the first Dizzy game,
Yes.
there's a few questions I want to find out about that game. What was the deal with that bridge, the one that kept on collapsing? Was that done on purpose?
Yes, of course it was. There's only one bug in there that actually worked really well. No, was that in the first game? Oh,
Jumping up through the well.
Jumping up through the well was
Jumping up
actually
through
a bug.
It's a bug, but actually it was a brilliant shortcut.
It was a brilliant shortcut.
I never knew about that. So what is the bug then? What is it? What happens?
Down in the mines, there's one place where it's possible to jump, and you actually appear on the screen above, but in the well. And actually, it was discovered after the game had been shipped.
Yeah, we published it, and somebody sort of said, "Oh, like the
shortcut," and it's like they showed it to us. And like, didn't know you could do that.
We didn't actually ever intend that, but because there was a hole in the screen above because of the well, and because you did just flick the screen because you just hit the right thing, it did flick up, and it was a brilliant shortcut to get back out the cave, because otherwise it was a walk around about 5 screens, and it did make you walk backwards and forwards a bit. And somebody found this, and they thought it was standard, but it was like we never intended it, but it worked.
The other thing I was going to ask you though, on the cassette inlay, you've got Dizzy there, very cartoony with his bright red boxing gloves. It says the ultimate cartoon adventure, but on the inlay, it's got 2 guys that look like Phil and Grant Mitchell from EastEnders. It's a Dizzy inlay. Basically, it's got him sort of like in a cave. Sort of looks like he's falling off a waterfall, and it's got some guys in dungarees.
They sort of imprison him, and then it's got nothing to do with it. I have to say, we didn't like the artwork.
The original box.
The
best box.
Well, we liked Fantastic
Fantasy
World.
Fantasy World Dizzy.
And we went and got an artist to do that.
Yeah, and that's Alistair Graham, and he was actually an artist that works freelance for Disney, and
we went and got
just did an amazing picture. Fantasy World Dizzy is such a cool piece of art.
We didn't like the art on the original. And you're right. There's 2 thugs.
Where's Zax? I thought we would see Zax there, but you've got Phil and Grant Mitchell there, and one of them looks like he's coming out of a sewer.
Sorry about that. I can see it now. What I would say is that how the games got their artwork back in those days is that quite often people would just get on the phone to an artist and they just describe over the phone roughly what they wanted. Yeah. And they never, I was going to say, they didn't even have fax machines. I mean, maybe faxes did exist then, but probably Codemasters had a fax and the artist didn't or something. So basically, they just pick the phone up to the artist and sort of say, sort of £100 to draw a painting that looks a bit like this and put it in the post.
The funniest one we did.
And they would have described it as like, well, it's an egg and it's kind of whitish and it's kind of got boxing gloves. And, well, he kind of adventures around the place, lots of challenges. He goes into caves and stuff. And that's the picture they got back.
That was a really, really funny story to just demonstrate how this happened with artwork. In the fact that we did a game called Operation Gunship, and we went to see the artwork, and they had drawn a warship. And it was like, here's the artwork.
It was a battleship.
It was a battleship, and it was like, so hang on. And the artist was told over the phone, send in a piece of art. It's a sort of action fighty game or whatever.
Lots of shooting called Operation Gunship.
Operation Gunship. So they did a piece of artwork and sort of stuck the word gunship and stuff on it. Yeah. And like they said, hey, here's new artwork for your game. And actually, only by fluke, we were up at Codemasters and they showed us this artwork that had just come through in the post. And we go, well, what the bloody hell's that? It's like, shit. And they go, well, it's a gunship. He's got big guns.
Look, ship with guns.
It's like, oh, we made a game about a helicopter. And
having just seen Rambo,
it was Rambo.
They've got helicopter gunships,
and they called helicopter gunships on Rambo, and that's kind of what inspired us to write that game. But the artist didn't know that you have helicopters called gunships.
So anyway, Codemasters then had a nice piece of artwork, which they then were touting around sort of all the game developers they knew, going, anybody want to create a battleship game for us?
We paid for this artwork.
So I think there is a battleship game we released a few months later.
Yeah, it was weird the way that happened.
And the other thing I was going to say then, so what happened then from Dizzy? What made you think we need to make a sequel?
Well, actually, we didn't for a while, because what actually happened was we finished Dizzy and we put it out, and actually it was the least successful of our games.
Really?
Robin Hood had gone straight to number 1. Ghost Hunters had done pretty well. But Dizzy was actually, it was bubbling around, it was okay. It was in the top 10, but it wasn't like a number 1 hit. And it carried on being like that for about a year. Oh, you've got a meeting. Okay. Andrew's going to carry on. He's got to be somewhere.
It was nice to talk to you, but you've probably gathered that Philip's, will say most of the things I'd say anyway.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time, Andrew. I really appreciate it. It's lovely talking to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Andy. Goodbye.
All right, take care.
No, so where were we? We got to, so it kind of was bubbling under, and we did things like the Grand Prix Simulator, Pro Ski, 3D Starfighter. We did a bunch of other kind of games, but what we found was there was always loads of fan mail sent to Codemasters offices every time we kind of dropped up there. We used to go up there about once a month to their offices just to have a chat to them, see how the royalty statements were coming along, and stuff like that. And there was always kind of a bag of post for Dizzy, sort of for us, because of Dizzy. And we could kind of see that there was quite a bit of interest. And we thought, well, why don't we kind of create another one? We can kind of fix a lot of the problems that were in the first one. For example, the inventory of only one item at a time.
That's right.
So, why don't we do another one? So we decided, almost on the back of those fan letters, that we'd create another game. So that was Treasure Island Dizzy. And that went absolutely bonkers. I mean, just the day it was released, the sales were enormous. It was straight to number 1, and it sold bucket loads. The reviews are fantastic and everything. And we're like, oh, crikey, there's like a silent audience that we hadn't properly appreciated out here. And what I think had actually happened was pretty much everybody that had taken like a year to buy Dizzy, so it had been kind of bubbling along for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Pretty much the day we released Treasure Island Dizzy, they all bought it. And it just went bonkers. So instantly we then knew, oh my God, that was when we realised, oh my God, we've just created something really big.
The thing I was going to ask you, what was the deal with One Life in the Treasure Island Dizzy?
It's a problem and a bug, and I'm sorry. If Andrew was here, he'd say sorry too. It was a bug at the last minute. There were 3 lives in the original Treasure Island Dizzy, but just as we were mastering it, we discovered that if you went underwater and put your objects down, that you would die, but the objects would be left underwater. So we're like, okay, we can handle this. We'll put it back on the beach. Your object's back on the beach. So when you die, your object's all up here, back on the beach next to you. Right, so we coded that for a day or two, and it's okay, that all works. And then we found somebody died on the beach the other side, and it's like water. It's like, oh, for God's sake! Now we've got to remember where they are. So it's like, right, okay, we'll fix that. So another day spent coding, fixing that, going right. We're going to remember which beach they came from. And then somebody died in the cave underwater. Yeah. It's like, oh, for pity's sake! It's like, So it was just a frustration after frustration, and then it was like, okay, let's think of every possible combination and permutation. And basically, we just started to work out that there were just so many combinations and permutations where it was possible to die underwater and never and lose a valuable object, or have the valuable object put back in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. And so we wimped out, and we said, you know, this 3 lives business, what if they only had 1? Oh, that solves it. That was a bit of a cop-out. So.
No, but I'll tell you what, though. I think Treasure Island Dizzy is probably one of the fans' favourite Dizzy games are out there. I mean, I actually prefer Fantasy World, but, loads of people love that for the difficulty. You need to know what everything is. You need to be really precise. And it really added, like, an extra element of gameplay. You had to watch out for the traps. You had to watch out for the fish under the water and so on.
Now, here's a funny thing. Back in those days, I do remember having conversations with lots of people that... We'd almost dumbed games down a little. We weren't the first people to do platform games by any stretch of the imagination. And if you look at games like Manic Miner that were around probably a year or 2 before us, they were so hard.
They were. It's pixel perfect jumping. If you died, that's because it was impossible, basically, that game.
Yeah. So we deliberately made Dizzy a lot easier. So the first Dizzy and pretty much all the Dizzy games, we deliberately made them a lot easier. But I remember always having conversations with people where they were saying, "Oh no," the industry people, i.e. Codemasters programmers and stuff, going, "Oh no, you're just dumbing down gameplay. Frustration is gameplay and all this." It's like, no, it isn't. No, we're just trying to create entertainment, and we were basically trying to make it simpler and simpler and easier to play. And if you look at Fantasy World Dizzy, it's again a level easier. The funny thing is, that I look back and go, how naive were we all? We hadn't actually taken it easy enough.
Yeah.
If you look at games these days that have gone absolutely bonkers successful, like Farmville, like Bejeweled, like Angry Birds, they are so simple, and that's why they've gone so mass market. And I kind of look back and think we went slightly mass market by making it a bit easier, but you know what? We didn't go further enough.
And you know what? I think that was one of the great things about it, because like you were saying before, like Manic Miner, it was all about it felt more like an arcade game where you can only play for a certain amount of times before you die. And what I liked about the Dizzy games, what drew me in, was that you could sort of progress through a few screens and not get killed straight away. So it sucked you in. It drew you into the adventure, which was Dizzy.
Yeah, well, I mean, the funny thing is, I don't think we went nearly far enough. It was interesting. I was playing an emulator version with my daughter a couple of years ago, and basically sat with her. It was Fantasy World Dizzy, and I sat with her and I sort of took her through what it was. I got various pictures of Dizzy around the wall at home and stuff. Yeah. And I've got 3 daughters. They kind of know what Dizzy is, and because every now and then I meet somebody or they meet somebody and mention. So anyway, I was basically playing this game with her, and I was like, and she was like, "Dad, can you do this bit? I'm stuck here and I'm stuck there." So anyway, I got through half an hour's worth, and I'd solved quite a few of the problems, and it was all coming back to me. But I was kind of sitting there doing most of the driving, to be honest. Anyway, I sadly lost my 3 lives somewhere up in the clouds, just popping out the clouds one too many times. And I was like, right, there you go. So if you'd like to just kind of get me back to there. And she goes, what do you mean get me back to there? Like, well, yeah, because what you're going to do is start back at the beginning and solve all the same puzzles that I've just shown you how to do. Yeah. And she was like, why would I want to do that, Dad? And it's like, just get me back to where I was and I'll take it on from there. No, we've lost all the lives. And, well, she didn't. And I don't actually blame her. And I kind of thinking, my God, it was a revelation to have a save game. But you know what? In some ways, why do we even almost have the concept of lives? I mean, why was it even necessary? Why don't you just basically carry on forever until the thing's solved? We were selling these games for $1.99, $2.99 or whatever. Would it have mattered if the game was sort of a little bit bigger or a little bit more difficult or whatever, but it never reset you? You basically always made progress. Yeah. It would have taken you 5 hours, 10 hours maybe, but you know what? Everybody would have been really, really happy. Everybody would have finished them. They'd have been hugely successful, I think. And in fact, a few years later, that's the way where games are.
Well, that's the thing you find with modern games. Like I was playing a few games on my Xbox, and no matter how many times I died, you'd get more lives. So eventually, after a couple of hours, like you said, you end up finishing the game. But I think what I liked about the Dizzy game is you get your set amount of lives, and if you don't make it, you die, and you think, okay, next time I play it, I've actually got to finish it and get that little bit further.
Yep, but there is such a level of frustration there, and what I would say is that if you manage to get to the very end of the game, you will feel so proud and you will remember that experience forever and be proud of yourself for doing it. However, how many people never finished the game and were left on a point of frustration that they've invested all these hours and they could never get to the end of the game?
Well, after how many years, I still haven't finished the first Dizzy, and it's still one of my missions to actually finish that game. And I'm not going to use any cheats or anything like now, but I cannot finish it. And I normally get to that one point where I think I've got everything, and then I get to that bridge, and I think, okay, I've got to time it to perfection. I've got to time it, and the next thing, I fall down on the bridge, and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, sorry. You'll get there.
right, so what we're going to do now is move away a little bit about Dizzy. We're going to start rounding things up. I'm going to ask you a few of the questions, Philip, that we've got from our community here on 1HMPS Retro.
Go on, hit me with them.
All right, so the first question comes from someone called Asperger's Gamers. They ask, will you ever do a HD remastered version of a Dizzy game?
We're very proud of Dizzy. We like Dizzy. We will do games that have the same passion, personality, gameplay, and everything else, but using the physical name Dizzy is problematic. Is problematic because of the contract that we signed originally with Codemasters. Leaves the IP, the intellectual property, in a very grey area where neither they or us can use the word or the characters Dizzy, which is a real shame. But I mean, I have to say that we as a sort of have continued to make many great games, which I would say are superior to Dizzy. And in fact, this Christmas there is a game coming that we're making, which is very reminiscent of Fantasy World Dizzy.
Really?
But I'm not going to say what it is yet.
No problem. The other thing I was going to say to you, Philip, I played a game from Blitz Games. I think it's called Clover, which was influenced by the Dizzy games.
That's correct. Yes, DJ wrote that. What's happened there is he was a big fan of the Dizzy games. He wrote the game himself, published it on Xbox Indie Games, and we then approached him saying, we like your game and everything. Any chance of putting it onto PC? We can kind of distribute it from our website and take it out to publishers and everything. And in that conversation, he came up, had a meeting, did the work, but actually then took a job. So he sits just down there. I can almost see him, and he's working. He's working on a very exciting new enterprise that we're doing, which is called IndieCity.com, which is a portal, a place for selling indie games. It's kind of Steam for indies. It's anybody can publish their independent games as long as they're independently developed. You can publish them.
Ah, okay. So it's something similar that they've got on Xbox Live with the indie games, where you get all the makers and they can distribute their games.
It is exactly that kind of service, only it's PC based.
I've been playing a game on my iPhone, Philip. I'm not sure if you've actually played it before. It's called Wizzly Presto.
I know it very well, and I have it, and I have been in contact with the people who made it and said they've done a very nice job.
I've actually been playing. I'm currently stuck on the second level of this game, but it reminds me so much of Dizzy.
It does. And yes, they're obviously big fans, and yes, they liked the fact that they suddenly got an email from me out of the blue praising them for it.
Well, what I was going to say to you then, speaking about the fans, what's your view then on yolkfolk.com?
No, that'll be Andrew Joseph, yolkfolk.com. He does a good job. He's a big Dizzy fan. We applaud people and like the fact that all these people are out there like Dizzy so much. I wish in many ways that we could bring Dizzy back to the world, but whilst we can't, if they want to, they didn't sign the contract with Codemasters, so...
Yeah, it's a shame. The other thing I was going to say to you then, there was a teaser released ages ago, which it was a Dizzy, but in 3D. What was that all about?
That was because we were in discussions with Codemasters, because it looked like they were going to allow us to do Dizzy games again, for them to be the publisher and for us to be the developer. It looked like it was going to be all promising. We were moving forward quite well, but then the Darling Brothers and Codemasters ran into various issues that had to be dealt with, and so Dizzy was basically put to one side.
What sort of game would that have turned out to be like then?
I imagine it. I mean, if you look at the kind of early Shrek games and stuff on the PS2, it would have been something like that, I guess.
Yeah.
When we first saw Shrek, it was like, oh, for goodness sake, it's like that's what the movie of Dizzy should have been.
That would be the perfect dream, to watch like a Dizzy movie or to watch like a Dizzy cartoon. All right, we've got a few more questions.
Coming sooner than you think.
Really? Oh, okay. Fingers crossed. I can keep dreaming.
It'll be obvious in a few months' time.
I cannot wait, honestly. I'm just so excited about that now. All right, we've got a question from one of our podcast hosts, actually, who's a huge Dizzy fan as well. He put, what inspired you to be a game programmer? I think we covered that.
I guess I guess me and Andrew, sci-fi geeks, as I said, sort of from the 80s, but the ability to actually control what was on the TV and control the picture, we just found mystifying and completely immersed in the dream that graphics would get better, the sound would get better, and it would get cleverer and cleverer. I mean, we're kind of futurists. We're always sort of, oh wow, wouldn't it be cool when this and this and this kind of all come together? And you don't need to spend very long with us at all for us to be getting on to sort of conversations about where the future is.
Well, speaking about the future, then, Philip, what's your view on 3D gaming? Then, do you think that's going to play a big part in gaming?
Of course it is. It's going to be massive. I mean, you may well be aware that we created the first commercial 3D game, which was Invincible Tiger. We have this book of records for that game, for being the first stereoscopic 3D game. So I have to say you've lost Andrew now, but he's the authority when it comes to 3D gaming.
Yeah.
And he's done lots of talks all around the world and gone into every TV manufacturer, and in fact, seems to have a lot of 3D TVs as well as a result. But of course, it's going to just be commonplace that all games are going to be kind of 3D in the future. When I say all games, obviously not your puzzle games, but
yeah, it's as long as they're implemented well and rather than sort of gimmicky, I think it will work. I think it's a great way, to take gaming into the next sort of generation, is to add 3D elements to it.
Absolutely. I mean, what I would say is that in the short term, there are a few issues. There's a little extra expense in producing the games. There's a little bit of problem with the processor speeds of current machines, that they have problems throwing around enough graphics fast enough to do it. The players have to wear glasses at the moment, so that's a bit of an issue. But you know what? These are all problems that you don't need to predict very far into the future. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. So all of these problems will just get knocked down with time. In 5 years,
technology moves on and on.
Yeah, exactly. In 5 years' time, you'll be able to quite happily watch 3D without glasses. Let's be honest, the 3DS is already here.
That's exactly what I was going to mention,
Yeah. So, but there's already better displays than that. I mean, when I was at E3, just somebody had a camera, just a video camera, and it showed me the screen. It was a 3D video camera from Sony, and they showed me the screen and said, "Oh yeah, I've just shot this 3D footage around the show." And they showed it to me, and I was like looking at it, going, "Oh, that's awesome!" And then I suddenly realised, you didn't give me a pair of glasses, and this is way better screen than the 3DS. So I'm like, "Wow, that's really neat, actually." But I mean, there's all sorts of technologies coming through, which will mean you won't have to wear glasses. Or, of course, there is the augmented reality glasses that are going to come along soon. I mean, that's not going to be too long before you basically just put on a pair of glasses and your video game and your head-up display and everything is just inside the glasses.
Well, that's what I was going to say to you then. What is your ultimate dream or sort of gaming? For me, it's the holodeck in Star Trek Next Generation.
Yeah, that is good. I always think of the Red Dwarf one every time. The Red Dwarf one is much funnier.
What was that episode called again? I can't remember.
I mean, we are getting there, aren't we? But you're absolutely right. So at the moment, you can kind of play Red Dead Redemption, where you're just looking onto a little piece of the world. Yeah. Whereas
phenomenal game that was.
The holodeck, every direction you kind of look, the world is surrounding you, and all the characters are aware of you, and you can interact with them. We are getting closer and closer and closer all the time to that.
Did you ever see a film called Existence, which I think was done by Dave Cronenberg, and it was about consoles in the future, and it was how you plug it into your spine and it takes you into your mind. It was an interesting film. It didn't get.
I think there was Lawn. I didn't see that one, but Lawnmower Man was something similar.
Oh yeah, that was another one. That was really well done as well.
Yeah, no, that second one's plugging things into your spine sounds scary as hell. I'm not signing up for that.
It's an interesting film because it's the differences, what is reality, what is not reality. All right, moving back onto the questions. I won't keep you too long, Philip. I've got someone that basically asked, Commodore 64 Quick Snacks, why is it different to the Spectrum version?
Okay, so how we used to write our games in the early days was obviously we started kind of on we actually went ZX81, then a Dragon 32, then the BBC Micro, and then we went to the Amstrad, and the reason we switched to the Amstrad was because it had a really cool disk drive. We had the 664 version, and so that's where we wrote Super Robin Hood, and that's where our success came from. Super Robin Hood was converted by somebody else, Mark Baldock, onto the Spectrum, and he took quite a long time to do it, like 6 months or something. We kind of figured, you know what, it's Z80 based. How hard can it be? We'll do our own next time. So Ghost Hunters, our very next game, we did, and in fact we released it before Robin Hood even released. So we then thought, right, we can cover Amstrad and Spectrum. That's quite easy. But when it came to the Commodore 64, we looked at that and it's like, oh, hang on a minute, this is a whole different ball game. This is a completely different chipset and everything, because we were Z80 and that was 6502, and it was completely different. You have to basically rewrite every line of code, and you had to redo all the graphics. So we basically were kind of, should we do this? Should we do our own conversions, or should we pay people to do it? Now, bearing in mind our royalties had already started coming in from Robin Hood and Ghost Hunters, we just thought, actually, let's just pay people. So, in fact, there was a very famous advert that Codemasters put out in something like Computer Weekly, where it was just like a spreadsheet almost of game, the game that had been written, the format that was required, the date that it was required to be released by, and a sum of money. So basically, and that game was in that list. So Quick Snacks would have been in that list, as were some of the others, where it was just exists on Spectrum, exists on Amstrad, need a C64 version, £2,000 available. And it was a spreadsheet as an advert, looking for programmers. And loads of programmers obviously applied, and I don't know who did the Commodore 64 version, but it would have been somebody applying to that advert, and basically being paid the money to do it.
All right, you can settle a long sort of dispute that me and my friend Glenn have got. He swears blindly the C64 version is better. I love the Spectrum version with the music intro, the cutscenes.
He's in that camp. I have to say, it was really funny because there's always been, over the whole age of kind of video games, there's always been two camps. At the moment, it's the Xbox 360 camp versus the PS3 camp.
That's right.
And then there was the Saturn and the PlayStation 1, and there was PlayStation 2 and the GameCube. All through the ages, there have been the two camps. Now, back in those days, there was the Spectrum camp, which would be friendly enough with the Amstrad guys because it was pretty much the same. And also the Amstrad guys needed some friends. There was the Commodore 64 camp when they were cool and they were hardcore and there was nothing. They knew every poke there was. I just remember at school people going, oh, yeah, you just poke 65753, 50, and you get this awesome game. And it's like, what are you talking about? They were. If you thought we were nerdy, then you haven't met those guys. But the funny thing was that I used to be quite kind of disparaging about the Commodore 64 guys and that. And we were quite happy writing our Amstrad Spectrum games and paying people to do our C64 games, and we quite liked the C64 games, and some of them were pretty good. Some of them weren't so good conversions, but the funny thing is that after we finished on the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum, we decided to move to the NES console, so the Nintendo's 8-bit console, rather than the ST and the Amiga. And the reason for this is that we'd just been to America, and the sales volumes were phenomenal. When we were getting a number one, we were selling like 200,000 or 300,000 of a cassette. Of a cassette at about £3, and you kind of think, nah, that's not bad.
But if you look, cartridge.
But if you look at what was happening in America at exactly the same time, the games like Super Mario Brothers were selling for £30 or £40, so 10 times the price. And we're talking about 1990, 91 here. Super Mario Brothers was up to 28 million copies. So there's us at our 200,000 or 300,000 at £3 a pop, looking at this and going, oh, we could have written that. And actually, if you look at the quality of Mario, it is an awesome game, don't get me wrong. But you look at it and where we were with our coding and our graphics, like, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that'll take about, if we had to do that game, that would take about, 6 or 7 weeks. And we think, bloody hell. So we just thought, right, we're going to switch to the NES and we're not going to go the Amstrad and Atari ST route. And so we started programming it, only to then discover it's just like a Commodore 64.
Right,
It's
really?
identical. The architecture of the NES is almost identical to the Commodore 64. Same chipsets, same everything. And then we
no
actually
idea.
started programming it and actually really liking it.
Yeah.
And we did some awesome games on the NES. And we were then like kicking ourselves going, oh, we were in the wrong camp all those years. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, okay, we're proud of our games that we made on the Amstrad Spectrum, but you look at what we did with the NES and we think, wait a minute, we could have done all this on the Commodore 64 if we'd have been in that camp.
Yeah.
Only we weren't. So actually, I kind of, at the time, we were always like, yeah, guys, you're wrong, we're right.
Yeah.
And then years later, it was like, oh, actually, eat humble pie. You were probably... Hey ho.
All right, then. Well, Philip, thank you very much for taking the time to actually appear on the podcast. Hopefully, it won't be too long before we record part 2.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you very much, Andy.